Taiwan is bursting with heaps of fun places to explore. Join me, Amber Hatfield, as I hit up travel hotspots, soak up some culture, and hunt down hidden gems. Let's go! Hi, and welcome back to Let's Go. I'm Amber Hatfield, and today we're going to be looking at the lighter side of Taipei's nightlife. I chatted with Sam Yarborough, who is the co-owner of 2-3 Comedy Club in Taipei. Sam and I chatted about how he got started in stand-up comedy, what was behind the creation of the 2-3 Comedy Club, and the comedy scene in Taipei as well. This will be part one of a two-part interview with Sam, so if you enjoy this episode, you can come back next week for more. I would love it if you could, to start things off, just like introduce yourself a little bit and tell me about your story, kind of why you're here and what it is that you do.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks so much for having me. And first of all, appreciate it very much. My name is Sam. I'm a stand-up comedian and one of the owners of 2-3 Comedy Club here in Taipei. I'm in charge of all the English language programming at the club. I've been in Taiwan for, I think, 11 years. I should nail that down. But I came here, like many people do, expecting to see Taiwan for a year and teach English. And 11 years later, here I am. And so been doing comedy for about 9 of those years, primarily here in Taiwan, but also around Asia a little bit as well. And my goal is kind of to continue to grow stand-up comedy in Taiwan, and working with 2-3 Comedy is how we're doing that.
Awesome. So have you always been into comedy, like since you were a kid?
Yeah, absolutely. Like growing up, I think Chris Rock was the first like really big one. Like me and my dad were really into it. I remember, this will date me a little bit, but we had the cassette player in the car, and we had his comedy specials on cassette, and we'd put it in and just drive around. And I remember just like I'd never seen my dad like laugh that hard, like listening to that. And so that put like the little worm in the brain, being like, oh, that's amazing. It's like just a guy talking can have that effect and everything. And so starting from there, then I got really into, I'd read all the comedy like biographies and books and things like that. And got really into comedy, but I never really pictured myself doing it or like performing or anything like that. I had a friend, I was living in Boston for a few years after university, and we always dared each other that we were going to take one of the comedy classes, the kind of class that walks you through an open mic and then you perform, but we never did it. And then when I finally was challenged by another friend in Kaohsiung who was starting an open mic, I kind of remembered that friend in Boston being all the times we'd talked about it and not done it. I was like, well, what's stopping me here? Come on. Like, I guess Kaohsiung was the place to take the plunge. Maybe the stakes felt lower. But so that was the first time I performed. It was at an open mic in Kaohsiung. And just got that bug from the first night performing and was like, okay, this is going to be part of my life in some way or another, right, going forward.
Cool. I bet it was nerve-wracking. Like, is it pretty nerve-wracking getting on stage for the first time?
Yeah, but at the same time, like when you start, I think you have to be like a little bit delusional. Like it was certainly nerve-wracking, but I remember having this impression that like, oh, like I did pretty well, like I got some, and like looking back, there's absolutely none of that material that's still in my set. There's nothing there that's worth saying on stage at all. So but I think just the infectious nature, like being in front of people and getting that instant feedback, was kind of addictive. Yeah, so no, it's certainly super nerve-wracking.
Yeah, so you were doing comedy for a while in Kaohsiung, maybe a few years.
Yeah, so I was very lucky when I started. A friend of mine named Rob Stocky, who had been doing comedy longer than me. Obviously, I just started. Was really serious about like having a go of like really making it in stand-up, and he had this van. He was a surfer. And so what we would do is, I had a friend in Kaohsiung named Tommy who had a wood shop, and he built us a stage. And because we couldn't perform in Kaohsiung every week, the audience would repeat, and we couldn't just create new material fast enough.
Right.
So we would contact bars around Taiwan through Facebook, and would reach out and we'd ask them if we could come and do shows. So he had this goal of 100 shows in a year, basically, was the goal, which meant that was one open mic in Kaohsiung every week, and then every weekend we got to be on the road. And we did it. We were able
Wow.
to succeed. So we would every weekend would just pack the stage into his van, take the surfboards out, put the stage in, and we'd drive somewhere and go and do shows in different places around Taiwan,
That's
everywhere. Like
so
I mean, some
cool.
small, like everywhere around the country. So yeah, it was a super amazing crash course learning experience and different kind of venue. Like some venues were really really receptive, like cool, a comedy night, and other venues were like fine, you can try it, and it's just the people in the bar don't even know a show's starting, and then they're like, what's the stage going? So it was all sorts of different experiences like that, but that's how I got started. Yeah.
Wow, that's so cool. So that was like a whole year, kind of every weekend you'll be going to different places and doing a show.
Every weekend, yeah. It
Wow.
was. I don't think we missed it because we hit 100 shows actually a bit early, because some of the places we could do like more than one show. So I remember, I think we hit 100 in about 10 and a half months or something. So yeah, no, it was definitely every weekend, as the girl I was dating at the time could probably attest. It was like, yeah, every weekend he's gone somewhere else. Yeah. So that was.
Wow. So you guys were both doing comedy in English at that time.
Yes.
It's not no Chinese or anything.
No Chinese, yeah.
Okay.
No Chinese comedy,
Okay.
yeah. And we'd recruit, from the open mic in Kaohsiung. We'd try to get some people from Kaohsiung to come with us. Because always more room in the van. Come on, hop in. And we had a few friends who came along for a few of those shows. And we'd always try to recruit somebody locally. In every town, there always seemed like there was somebody who'd wanted to give stand-up a try, or maybe had done an open mic at a music open mic or something like that. It's people. Normally, we could get at least one or two local people to come up and just do like a 5-minute spot and just do it. Yeah.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. That sounds really fun.
It was a fun year. It was a good time. There's certain parts of it I don't miss, driving from Kaohsiung to Sinju, like 5-hour drive to go and do poorly for 10 minutes, and then you got 5 hours ahead of you going back, like, what am I doing? This is my whole weekend. But the good times outweighed the bad for sure, and so it was all like a learning experience, right? And so I think that was super helpful to get started.
Awesome. And so then after doing that, what sparked the kind of idea to start 2-3 Comedy, which we have now?
Basically, when I moved up to Taipei, I wanted to continue to do comedy, and I wanted to kind of grow. And I had a few like very basic ideas of what like I thought was necessary to have a comedy scene, and the most important one was a regular open mic. It might not seem obvious, but a lot of times when things start, like any kind of performing art, the way things usually start is with some kind of show or production, right? Like if you're going to do a theater, you're going to practice, rehearse, but you're doing it for a show, a production. Same thing with music. You want to play in front of other people. For comedy, there was kind of the same way, but basically at that time in Taipei, the only live performances were shows. To be like once a month there'd be a show, which meant there was no regular open mic for people to go practice. Now they had started one just a few months before I moved up to Taipei, but the venue was always kind of like in question if they would let the open mic continue. And I had a lead on a venue, on a space from a show I had done previously up in Taipei, that had a basement room, which was 23 Beer Company. 23 Public was the name of the bar. It was on Xinhailu. And they had this basement space. And so I asked them if we could just take their worst night, which was Monday. I was like, can we do Monday night? And is anyone using the basement? And they were like, yeah, no, go ahead. Like, who's this crazy guy who wants to do? And then from there is where it grew. So the initial original impetus was I want a space for a regular open mic. Put the mic first before shows, and then from the shows, from the mics, we built a monthly show we called Craft Comedy, which is still the monthly show we do at 2-3 Comedy Club now. And I started with a girl named Meg Anderson, who was doing improv classes and doing improv. And so her and I started, and we decided to call it 2-3 Comedy because we were at 23 Public, the beer space.
Okay.
We thought that was clever at the time. It was like people will know where it is. Now, inevitably, everyone calls us like 23 Comedy and 2-3 Beer. It's just all backwards, and all the branding is all confused. But that's where the name came from, and that's why we wanted people to know, hey, there's one place for comedy in Taipei. If you're looking for comedy in Taipei, go here. So 2-3 Comedy started just as a Facebook group organizing shows. Yeah.
Okay. And when did you open?
So it's important to make a distinction between 2-3 Comedy Club, which is what it is now, the physical space on Linsenbeilu, and 2-3 Comedy, which was just the idea me and Meg had.
Right.
Meg and I were doing that for about 2 years, and during that time, a good friend of mine who I was doing comedy with, Brian Sung, is a Taiwanese comedian. He started doing Chinese shows, and he's since blown up. He's the most popular Chinese language comedian in Taiwan. So he was working with us doing the Chinese language shows. And once his shows started to really, really blow up and we added a weekly Chinese open mic, that was when we kind of started talking to the owners of 23 Beer Company about maybe this isn't just a show at your bar. Maybe this could sustain its own venue. This could be its own place. And so it was December 2019 that we opened 23 Comedy Club, and that's the first time 23 Comedy was anything like official, like on paper, an LLC. Before that, it just existed as like a Facebook page, like an organizing for shows. Yeah.
Okay.
So December 2019 was when we opened up. Great timing for an international comedy club, by the way. Yeah. Really nice.
Right,
Yeah. It was really good. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you guys manage during COVID then?
I mean, as anyone who is here in Taiwan knows, Taiwan probably handled the pandemic as effectively or more effectively than any country in the world, right? So for a long time, we weren't able to bring anyone over to perform internationally, but we were able to stay open and do local shows and things like that. So for years we had that. And then the actual period of like the lockdown, I think 10 weeks was the longest stretch we ever had. And there was some government assistance programs and things like that. And there were different things that could have happened during that time. And it was obviously tough, but it was tough for every single business everywhere. And at least for a comedy club, it was definitely a tough time. But compared to what other places in the services industry had to go through, things like restaurants that have like regular orders of food and stuff like that, like we didn't have as big a supply chain to get disrupted because our main thing we had, it was a bar and then shows, and we were able to keep doing the shows locally during that time. So it was certainly tough, but we were positioned a bit better than a lot of other entertainment options might have been and things like that. So yeah, it was a tough time for everyone, but I feel bad like complaining about it. It was relatively not as bad for us. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And I want to ask a little bit about the Chinese versus English shows, because it sounds like you have half and half. Like is it half Chinese, half English in terms of what you guys offer now?
Yeah. I mean, we have, I'm in charge of the English language programming, and then comedians Smile Danny and Brian are in charge of the Chinese language comedy. To say half and half, like, I don't know if it ever really breaks down in that way, but our schedule's divided where, on a typical Friday night from 7 to 9 p.m., there's a Chinese language open mic, and then the English show will start at 9:30 and go till late. The biggest difference is because of the size of the performer pool and the audience, the Chinese language comedy is a bigger scene in general. Right. So they have a bit more, at 2-3 Comedy, there's almost exclusively stand-up shows for Chinese. They do a show Manzai, which is a Japanese form of xiangxiang, the crosstalk comedy, every Sunday. They do have improv shows, but the English programming is much more kind of diverse. We have pub quiz, we have drag shows, we have improv shows, theater shows, and things like that. So in general, there might be a 50-50 split between English or Chinese shows, but the English shows might not only be stand-up. There's different kinds of programming, different kinds of shows. For example, tonight at 2-3, again, 7 to 9 p.m., Chinese language open mic. And then starting at 9:30, there's a drag show from House of Wicked drag performers doing a show at the club that will go from like 9:30 till probably late. The drag shows tend to go late. So but yeah, in general, the recipe we kind of found that works the best for us is early Chinese and late English. Okay. Early being kind of the typical time you'd have a comedy show at for the Taiwanese audience to come in after work, after dinner, catch a show during the week, maybe have a drink, and then normally, not staying out too late. Whereas the English shows, a lot of our audience are bushiban teachers who might be finishing work much later, and they might want to stay at the bar a bit later as well. And so there's a bit more of the, nightlife drinking bar culture in the English stand-up side. So that's a model that works for us pretty well. Have an early Chinese show, a late English show.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. So you just mentioned about the performer pool being quite small. So is it hard to find English language stand-up performers, or do you mainly pick from like the people who come to do the open mics and things like that, or is it?
Yeah, so there's two. I mean, the two basic kinds of performers that we have at the show, we have regular open mics. If anyone's unfamiliar, open mic means anybody can come in off the street, you sign your name on the piece of paper, and you can perform up to 5 minutes. So there's no barrier to entry for any of these shows. Our monthly show, Craft Comedy, which is the local showcase show, will be comics selected from that open mic pool, basically, who's been working on new material, who, we try to rotate, keep that fresh. We also have access to comics who are touring around Asia, who are in the region, and other, what I describe as like regional headliners. For example, comics who have been doing English comedy for a long time. There's English language scenes in places like Shanghai, Hong Kong, Seoul, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur, Tokyo. All these cities have their own English language like scenes there. So the best from those scenes can come over and do shows at the club. We get work permits for people like that to bring people over. And other, international comics who are just touring. This September, we have a comic named Matt Davis, who's an American comic. He's currently doing a run at the Edinburgh Fringe, but we'll be bringing him over in September, September 20th for a show. Dwayne Perkins is a comic based in LA who's touring Asia. So basically, we might lack some of the resources to fly a comic from New York to Taipei. Right. But if they're doing Hong Kong, Singapore, Kuala Lumpur already, then adding Taipei as a stop is kind of how we planted our flag. So that's one way that we bring comics in. But no, in terms of the local scene, it's all about, developing the open mic scene and the people from the open mics.
Yeah. I was going to ask you, how do you think Taipei comedy scene kind of compares to those other cities? I mean, I'm sure in places like Shanghai it's massive, probably, because they've got such a big
massive. I would put Shanghai over to one side for now because of how they're dealing with a lot more than just there's a lot of political considerations and things like that. There's a lot of speech issues and things like that. They recently had in the Chinese language community a huge controversy. A comedian was fined $2 million for a joke that was perceived as negative towards the government. Wow. So I don't know actually what the local English stand-up scene is like. There's a hilarious comic there named Nora Yang who runs a club called Spicy Comedy. It's a huge venue, and they have some English language shows, I know, but I'm not as familiar with what the scene is like there right now. But compared to, like, let's say Hong Kong or Singapore, where you have a much higher English language speaking local population, there's certainly more opportunities for maybe larger English speaking audiences in those places. But I think we kind of punch above our weight in that respect, that we have a lot of people who are still interested in seeing English language comedy, and we've developed and been lucky just to have a lot of really, really talented comics here locally. So I think that we do well, and also the benefit of, because we work closely with the Chinese language comedy, that we have this big venue. It's pretty unique to have an English language comedy club in any of these cities, even a place like Singapore, which has great shows and stuff like that. To have a venue that's just entirely for the purpose of comedy is unusual. So we're very lucky in that respect.
That's all for this week's episode of Let's Go. Join me again next week as I continue my chat with Sam. See you there.